We're going to get started. So today we're talking about the process of summarizing research, which is, obviously crucial to what we're doing right now, because of the fact that the next big assignment, which is due, I think, next week or so, maybe this week, I forget. I don't have the, yes, I do have the syllabus handy. Yes, so it's due today, the annotated bibliography, right? So, so this is crucial to doing a good job with the annotated bibliography. But the good thing is that we've actually really been talking about what is important for summarizing research, except in a different format. So you may not have been aware of it, but in fact we were working our way up to this. Okay, so first of all, what's a summary? Okay, that's really important. And so there I have a definition that I produced. I think it's pretty decent, or at least it works. So summarizing means producing a shorter version in your own words of the content of another text. Okay. Now, in your own words is obviously important, because what I'm saying there is don't quote verbatim the text that you're summarizing. Okay. That's really not a good idea, because you're never going to summarize it if you just quote it. Okay, so you need to be speaking in your own voice, using your words. Now you will recall from the previous discussion, one of the previous discussions, we said in some cases it's okay to maintain the original wording, and that is when you have a situation where you really need the original wording. Like, for example, when you're going to disagree with the author, okay? When you want to say the author is so wrong that they say X, right? So then you need to have X, because otherwise people will say, well, you're not representing accurately what the author was saying, okay? Now, shorter, you may think that that's obvious, but it's not. I found out this the hard way, because one day a student turned in a summary, and the article was, let's say, 1,000 words, and the summary was 1,500 words. And I had to point out to the student that that was not a summary. It needs to be shorter than the original. Notice that I don't say how short, and we'll deal with that later. Now, content, and that's really important, it must have the same information, okay? So in other words, you cannot just say, well, let me change the information, okay? It has to be faithful to the original text, okay? It needs to reproduce faithfully, carefully, exactly what was in the previous text, okay? And then also very, very important, it needs to be neutral, okay? In other words, it's okay if you want to comment, okay? If you want to say, Attardo claims that, not all humor is aggressive, he's deeply wrong, I think all humor is aggressive. All right, that's very good. But do that in a separate space, literally draw a box, and then inside the box write, in my opinion, this guy is wrong, okay? Or use a red pen. If you're taking notes in blue or black, use a red pen for your comments. Or, introduce them as footnotes, whatever, okay? The important thing is make sure that you distinguish very carefully between what is your opinion and what the author said, okay? Because not distinguishing carefully can lead to all sorts of problems, okay? So it's okay to comment, okay, not a problem, but that should be done outside of your summary. Don't say, Attardo says wrongly that blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's editorializing, and it's not a good summary. Okay, your summary should say, Attardo says this, end of the summary. Oh, and by the way, he's wrong. Okay, so the summary is an objective representation of what the person said, or persons said in that particular paper. And then the other thing is it should be documented. Okay, in other words, always keep track of who's saying what. Okay, remember I said you should never quote something that you've read somewhere. You should always be quoting the original source. But if you make a note of a bit of information that comes from another source, that's okay. Just make sure, again, that you keep track of who's saying what. Okay, so what I do is I put QT and then where it's quoted. So I will say, you know, Smith 1985, QT Attardo 1994. Right, and so that way I know that it's Attardo 94 who's quoting Smith. Right? I haven't seen Smith, and therefore I'm not going to quote it. Okay? Because the risk, which is a very real risk, especially when you get to be my age, is that you forget. And when you've read, you know, 100 articles or 50 articles, you forget. And then you will have a note and you say, oh, that sounds like really clever. So you use that note, and then it turns out to be plagiarized, or it turns out to be wrong. And then you're in deep trouble. Okay? So that's why it's absolutely crucial that you keep track of who said what. Okay? Because if you say, oh, wait, I actually haven't seen the Smith reference that Attardo is quoting, so I need to go find it through interlibrary loan or through Google Scholar or whatever before I can quote it. Okay? That quote looks really good. Oh, okay. Very strange noise that's coming out there. Okay, so, and then there is a resource there that I found, and it's at MIT. So I thought if it's good enough for MIT, it's good enough for us as well. So you can look up, they have something to say, which I thought was pretty decent, about how to summarize things. It's roughly the same thing that I just said, but hey, it's MIT. All right, so that's the definition of what summarizing is. Now, okay, so why do we summarize? Okay, that is what's the reason for summarizing? Well, basically is, and you know, don't take this the wrong way, that a lot of the information that you're going to find in academic papers is good, it's important, it should be there, etc. But for what you are doing, it's not that relevant. It's not that important. Okay. What they're doing is, you know, really basically just saying this is how I got to my argument, and you need to be able to double check how they got there, right? I mean, that's the whole idea of science, is that you can double check it, right? But if you're just interested in a specific point, if you're just reading the article to find out about something, you know, then all that detail is unnecessary. All you need is what's the point that the person is making, right? You know, so for example, you know, one of my students just did a dissertation on oral corrective feedback to see whether if you smile when you're correcting the students, they correct their language behavior more. Okay, they don't. All right. So now, do we need the detail that she collected the data in Turkey using 7 classrooms, et cetera, No. All we need to know is that smiling doesn't particularly improve uptake of oral corrective feedback, right? And that's all we need, right? So all the detail is really unnecessary. What we need here is the point. Smiling doesn't help people change their linguistic behavior after correction. All right, so that's pretty good, right? You know, so because of this, right, we don't need all the detail, and then we summarize and we get to the point. Her thesis is like 100 and some 150 pages long. I just summarized it in 1 sentence. Okay, and that is a good thing, by the way. It's not a bad thing. It means it has a clear, good, understandable thesis. Okay, The other reason that we summarize is actually to build an argument. And this may strike you as strange, but in fact, if let's stick with the example of the dissertation. If you went and read all 150 pages of text, it's very hard to keep all of these details in your head at the same time, okay? It's much easier to keep in mind smiling while correcting students doesn't improve the student's performance, okay? So that's a much simpler thought to keep in your head, right? To remember 150 pages of text is much, much harder. So when you're building an argument, having these micro summaries of an article, etc., is really useful because it allows you to then stitch together these mini summaries for a bigger argument. Okay, so summarizing is not just for your literature review, but it's also to build an argument, to make a point. Okay, so it works both places. All right, so how do we do this summarizing business? Well, first of all, let's do it the clever way. Most of the time, the author conveniently lets you know where the summary is of their paper, okay? And so they will have a section called abstract that's at the beginning of the article, and usually like in different type, maybe in italics or something like that. And that is literally a summary of the paper. And it's usually less than a page long, right? So that's great, right? So the author has already done a lot of the work and tells you, here's the summary of what I'm saying in this article, right? Now, here there is a very tempting thing, which is to say, great, I read the abstract, I don't need to read the paper, okay? Now, that is wrong, wrongety, wrong, wrong, wrong. Okay, why is it wrong? Because you're trusting the author. Okay, but trust me, I have met a lot of authors. I'm an author myself. They're not always reliable. They're not always the best source about what they're doing in their paper. Okay, because sometimes we think that we're doing something, but in fact we're doing something else. Okay, and the author would be the first one to be really surprised when you point out to them that they're not doing what they said they were going to do in their paper. They're doing something else. Okay, for example, lots of authors who say, my paper I will prove, and they do no such thing. They at best present an argument for something. Okay, now the other reason not to stop is, even assuming that the author is very reliable, the one idea that you need, the idea that's going to rock your world, that's going to change the direction of your paper and make it fantastically good, may not be in the abstract. Okay, because the idea that's most important to you for your paper may not be the idea that was most important for the author. In fact, it's unlikely to be, right? Because otherwise you'd be writing the same paper, right? So therefore, you need to read the paper because you really need to know what did the author have to say in general, okay? Not just what was the main point. Now, if it's not relevant, then you discard it, okay? But the most important idea for you may not be necessarily in the abstract. The other risk is plagiarizing, okay? Because there you have a very nice few sentences summary of the article. It's really tempting to take a couple of sentences from the abstract and plunk them in your literature review, okay? That is not a good idea, okay? Because I will find this and I will call you out on it, and then you will be in real trouble. Okay, so don't do that. It's really the kiss of death in academia. I mean, and it can have very serious consequences, even expulsion from the university. So you really don't want to go there. Which is why, by the way, you need to be super careful about documenting. Whenever you write down verbatim put it in quotation marks and put the page number of the reference, because otherwise you may forget that you were, copying verbatim a piece of text and say, hey, that sentence right there really nicely summarizes the paper. Yes, great. Let me use it, except that the author wrote it. And so now you plagiarized and you don't even know it. Okay? And again, I will find those. Okay? And by the way, if you don't believe me that I will find those, test me, because we have, sort of like almost a sixth sense for catching these things, because it just sounds different. And so we can tell immediately whether the sentence was written by the student or not. The number of times that I thought, okay, this was plagiarized, and then it turned out not to have been plagiarized, I can count on the fingers on one hand. And usually that was an exceptionally good student who just was writing so well that I thought, well, that cannot be, right? All right. So the abstract is not the only place where the author is helping you in terms of what's the content, how to summarize the piece. There might be keywords. So obviously the keywords are going to tell you what are the most important, component of the argument here that the author is building. There might be headings, titles, subtitles, section titles, that kind of thing, that again are going to tell you in that particular section what's the author talking about. So if you remember the whole idea of signposting that we discussed in the past weeks, if the author has done signposting, that makes your job of summarizing that much easier, because you can say, all right, so methodological preliminaries, I don't really need to read that very carefully. You still need to read it, but you don't need to be super careful, because probably you're not going to need that, or you're just going to need a very passing mention of the methodology, like is this discourse analysis, is this semantics, is this pragmatics, what have you, right? And then finally, emphasis indicates usually the most important parts of an essay, of a paragraph, of a statement. So if you find, for example, an entire couple of lines bolded or italicized, that tells you that the author wants to draw your attention to those particular, couple of sentences. And usually the reason that they want to do that is because it's like their main thesis, the most important point that they're making. So these are all cues that you can use to help you on summarizing, okay? Now, there's more to this. So the other thing that you should do, of course, is as you read the paper, look for the thesis of the paper. Look for the main point, the place where the author says, this is what I have proven, this is what I have demonstrated, this is what I have done, okay? And remember, we talked about this in American academic style, these paragraphs will be at the beginning, these theses will be at the beginning of the paragraphs, right? So that's an easy place to be looking for them. Also, if you're struggling to identify the thesis of a paragraph or of a section, look in terms of the most abstract, the most general statement in the text. Most likely that's going to be your thesis. The only exception would be introductory paragraphs where the author is saying, people have done a lot of research in intonation, intonation is a very important topic, and now I'm going to talk about X, right? So that introductory part, of course, is more general, but it's not really the paper. It's just a little bit of blah, blah that the author is putting there to introduce the paper, right? So it's not that important. Now, what if the author is not helpful at all? Okay, that is, what if there is no signposting, there is no abstract, there is nothing, all you get is the text, okay? Well, so then there you have to do sort of the hard work yourself and ask yourself, okay, what's the most important bit of information in this paper? Okay, what information stands out from the rest? Okay, and then most importantly, relative to your paper, okay, relative to your interest, what is the most important information in this paper? okay? And then you write that down, okay? And as I said, you have to be careful because sometimes the author not only is not helpful, but in fact is misleading, all right? Because they are not giving an accurate representation of what they're doing because of a number of reasons that we don't need to go into, but I've seen it happen, okay? That is, people will say, in this paper we do X, Y, and Z, and then in fact they don't do anything even remotely like X, Y, and Z. I'll give you an example. At some point there was a craze for writing software that generated jokes, okay? So basically what you would do is you would have like a template, along the lines of like, what do you get if you cross X with Y, right? And then you would put two things into X and Y and you'd get a joke. So, all right, okay, that's good. Then somebody said, well, you know what? It would be interesting to take this joke generator and put it into a chatbot. A chatbot is like when you type online and, there's a machine that responds to your chat, right? And so you're actually chatting with the computer, okay? And the computer pretends to be chatting with you. It's really not, right? So what they did was plug in this program into the chatbot so that at random moments, the computer, instead of answering your question, would produce a joke. And they said, oh, look, we have integrated a joke generator into a chatbot. But of course, they'd done no such thing. They just plugged the two things together, and the chatbot generated the random joke at a random time. Okay, so there was no saying, say, hey, computer, tell me a joke, then boom, here's a joke, right? But you could have said, computer, I'm very sad because my dog died, and the computer would have said, so what do you get if you cross a dog and an apple, right? And I don't know. I don't know if there is a joke for that. In fact, assignment, send me a joke that answers that question. I don't know. A golden delicious poodle, something like that, right? But it would have been completely out of context because you said, I'm sad that my dog died, and the computer tells you a joke about dogs and apples. Right? So it's completely, so they haven't integrated anything. All they've done is, something very different that I don't know what you would describe it, but it sure isn't integrating a chatbot into a humor generator into a chatbot. Okay? So again, authors are not always the most reliable authority on what they have done. You are the most reliable authority on what they have done, assuming you understand what the author did. All right, so things that you should never do, that you should not do. First of all, plagiarize. Don't do that. Bad idea. Second, rely on someone else's summary. Again, people make mistakes. You don't know that you can trust them. I think we went over, if not last week, the week before, I told you about the author who'd done a book proposal, and she had misread something that I said with some colleagues in a paper. And, so she ended up thinking that Brown et al. 1980 talked about humorous pauses, where it doesn't. It just talks about pauses. But she misunderstood, right? So if you relied on her summary of what Brown and et al. Did in 1980, it would have been bad, okay? And so that's my point, is you cannot trust the author, so you better check yourself, okay? And the other thing is, don't assume that the author's abstract is necessarily accurate. Okay, we've talked about this at length. So you don't know whether it's accurate. I mean, probably it is, because usually the author knows what they did, but you want to check it. Okay, so in other words, you have to read the whole article, and then you can say, oh yeah, the abstract was actually quite accurate. And it's okay to even quote the abstract, verbatim, if you really have to. Okay, but you have to be very careful not to quote it verbatim and then forget to put it in quotes. Okay, and then finally, remember this: you are summarizing for your purpose. Right? That is, you're not doing this as a homework for the class. I mean, okay, it is also a homework in the class. I agree. But the point here is that you're doing it to write your paper, right? It's a tool to help you write your paper, right? And that's the really crucial bit of information, okay? You are writing your own summary for your own purposes, which is to write the paper. Okay, what that means is that in all likelihood, no two summaries will be identical, right? Because each and every one of you is writing a different paper, and therefore you would extract from the source different bits of information. Now, they shouldn't be completely different or even radically different, but the emphasis and maybe some things that get quoted or don't get quoted, yeah, there's going to be some differences there. Okay. The other thing is, important. Summarizing means that you're learning. Okay. This is how we acquire new knowledge. You read something, and then you repeat it in your own words. Okay. And because we don't have time, it's going to be less words than the original. Right. So then summarizing is an important step in the process of doing research, because that's how you acquire new knowledge. Right? When you're writing a summary or you're thinking a summary in your head, that's when you're learning new stuff, right? Now, and this is really important, you cannot skip this step. Okay, that is, you cannot say, well, I'm not going to read the research, I'm just going to rely on someone else's summary, or even worse, I'm just going to make the stuff up and not bother too much, because surely that's what they will have said. If you do that, then your research becomes fraudulent. That is, you're just making stuff up, and that's an unforgivable sin in academia. Or worse, it's ignorant. That is, you just don't know what you're talking about. Okay, and so you summarize in order to extract information from the various authors that you are reading. And extracting the information is learning, and is what the point is of doing all of this. You need information in order to be able to write your paper. Okay? All right, so that's all I have. That's not all I have. My bad. I take it back. But we have a few, just like 3 more or 4 slides. So length. Basically, a summary can be any length, as long as it's shorter than the original. Okay. Now, however, there are 2 lengths that are usual, and they tend to be the most useful ones. Okay. One is the 1-sentence summary. That's what I just did with my students' research on oral corrective feedback. I said, her study showed that smiling during oral corrective feedback did not improve the students' uptake of the correction. That's it. That's a 1-sentence summary, right? It says everything you need to know about the dissertation in 1 sentence. Okay? That's the argument, that's the point, that's the finding. Okay? That's it. That's just the main point, just the thesis. Now, then the other thing that you can do is say, I'm going to give you a paragraph length summary, in which I'm going to have the main thesis, of course, because that's the summary. And then I'm going to have evidence for my thesis in the following sentences. So that the rest of the paragraph gives you the evidence for why am I saying this. Okay? You know, so these are the two most common lengths. Sometimes you're going to find, you know, longer summaries that are 2 or 3 paragraphs. That's fine. That's fine. More text means more detail, more information. So that's fine. And sometimes you're going to find summaries that are very, very long. Usually it's going to be like, you know, a summary of a book, right? Then if you're going to summarize it all, it's going to take you much longer because you need to explain for each chapter what does the chapter do, etc. So it's possible to have summaries that are long, you know, pages long, but it's fairly unusual, to be honest. Now, I would like to draw your attention to this, though. A longer summary is not necessarily a better thing. Okay, longer isn't necessarily better. Okay, because the point of doing, you know, 1-sentence summaries is that you really have to focus on what is the most important thing. And sometimes, if you know the expression to miss the forest because of the trees, you start paying attention to so many little things and all the minutiae that the author is presenting that you lose track of what is the big argument, the big point that the author is making. Okay? You know, so too much detail, too much information isn't necessarily a good thing. The one example that I like to quote is at some point I read the dissertation of a colleague and then friend of mine, and she had written literally 2 or 3 pages, I don't remember the exact length, but it was pages on the placement of the video cameras in the classroom that she had recorded. And I was like, really? You needed that much detail? You couldn't have said there were 2 cameras in the classroom? Yeah, but she had like pages, I mean like 2 or 3 pages on where the cameras were positioned and so on and so forth. And then, by the way, it never became relevant. You know, it never was like, well, and unfortunately I lost all sorts of information because there was this corner in the room that wasn't covered and the teacher, of course, went and stood right there. No, it was just like, this is how we decided where to put the cameras and you know, this and that. And as I said, it wasn't relevant from the standpoint of what is this paper about? Is it about positioning the camera in the room? No. That was just a bit of information, an unnecessary bit of information on the way to this is what people do. Okay? You know, and then pick the length that works for you. Okay, that is, if you are doing a very detailed analysis of something, then there might be some crucial paper, some really important one that you want to do a longer, more detailed summary, and that's fine. Okay, I mean, if you have found the one source that does everything, you want to do a much more in-depth job than for the others. Now, however, the risk there is that you're going to say, oh, this is important, this is super important, oh, this is really important, and this one here is also super important. And if they all are beginning to be important, then you're doing it wrong. Okay, that is, not everything is equally important in every paper. Okay, so if you find yourself accumulating super important papers, you need to say, wait, that I may not be getting this because that's not the way it should be. Okay. So here's an example that I literally yanked from the book that I'm writing right now, because I thought, oh look, I've done quite a paradigmatic job of summarizing. So here I'm summarizing a paper by Yabuchi, and I say, simplifying a little, Yabuchi's model can be represented as follows: fellowship politeness, autonomy politeness, hierarchy politeness, right? The 3 kinds of politeness. And then I say, Yabushi claims that hierarchy politeness corresponds in part to a sincerity parameter. In other words, surplus politeness doesn't become impolite, it becomes ingratiation and flattery, which is obviously insincere, unlike positive politeness. In other words, I'm saying, so the Yabushi organizes the concept of politeness around 3 poles as opposed to 2, right? And then, he says you have this surplus of politeness, which is basically when you're like extra polite, which is obviously not sincere anymore. So some people had said that, oh, well, then it becomes impolite. To be too polite is to be impolite. No, says Yabushi. In fact, it becomes ingratiation or flattery, right? And so that's that. And then I have another sentence about the power differential and how that fits in with deference, right? There you go, right? So this is a what? 6 lines with the bullets there, and a summary of an entire paper. No? But all the important information is there. At least I hope. Okay. So I thought that I'd give you this this example, and then finally some words of practical advice. The most important one is find a system that works for you. Okay, I can't tell you what the system is because it really is a personal decision. Some people do it online. They use Google Drive or that kind of thing. There's software that does this for you. Some people organize it as an archive of PDF files on their computer. Some people like to write by hand out things. Sticky notes. I put sticky notes in books. I don't know if I've got any that I can show you. No, not really. But I put sticky notes in my books so that they become sort of like there's these sort of mountain of sticky notes emerging from my book. Let me see if I can. Oh, here. Okay, this is a book, right, that I've been using, and you can see that I have quite a few sticky notes in it, right? And so for each sticky note, then I have little arrows. I don't know if you can see the little arrows. Can you see the little arrows? Yeah, so the little arrows that said, this is why this is important, right? So that's the system that works for me, all right? Because I don't like to write in books, but you may say, screw it, and just underline directly in the book, okay? Again, whatever it is that works for you, good, you do that, okay? A friend of mine in graduate school had a pen that had 4 colors. There were 4 different colors. And so he would do like blue for the original citation and green for his ideas and red for something else. And I was like, I couldn't remember. I couldn't keep straight the 4 different colors, but it worked beautifully for him. So again, find a system that works for you, organize your research. If your research is not organized, you will shoot yourself because you will lose stuff and you will waste time and it will be a horrible experience. Okay, use folders, use whatever it is that works for you. Piles on your desk. I do piles on the desk. It's a great system. Not good if your cleaning lady comes and cleans out your house, as I found out the hard way one time. The next thing is, okay, you have a system, now stick to it, okay? If you don't use it, the best system in the world isn't gonna save you, okay? Because a system is only as good as you actually using it, okay? So if you're not using the system, it's not going to help you. Don't waste your time setting up this wonderful system and then don't use it. Okay? And I've seen people do that. Okay? There was a colleague of mine, she basically quit her job and left the university, and she literally left books and folders, etc., in her office. And so I went in to clean up. Not clean up the office, but sort of take the books that I wanted and so on. And I saw these folders, and they were like beautifully organized with dividers and labels that had been typed. It was fantastic, except she never did any research. So she'd done a fantastic job of organizing the stuff, but then apparently never read the articles. Okay, that's a mistake. Okay, so you want to have a system that works, but then you want to use your system to do your research. And then final thing, document everything that you read. Never, ever, ever fall for the temptation of saying, well, I'm not going to quote this article, so why bother? Okay? Because if you do that, I promise you that in 6 weeks you will say, if I only had that, there was that one sentence that would have been perfect for this. Where did I read it again? Let me go back and try and find it. Okay? And you will never find it again. And therefore you will start drinking and you will ruin your life. And it will all be because you didn't document everything that you read. So be smart, document everything that you read, because then you will make sure that you'll never need it again, because you documented it. So you'll never need that particular piece again. But document everything that you look at. Never say, oh, I'm not going to need this at all, because it's a surefire way to guarantee that you will need it. All right, okay, so that's the end of my lecture. Any questions?
Yes. Is the annotated bibliography, is it due tonight, you said?
No. It's due Friday at midnight.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
No, sorry.
Oh my God.
Yes, here's how to give heart attacks to people. Oh, sorry. Can you ask me again? No, it was due 5 minutes ago. No. It's due Friday at midnight. All assignments in this class are due Friday at midnight. Other questions, anyone? No, you're stunned into silence, Mimi? Stunned into silence as well. All right, okay, very good. Then if there are no other questions, I'm going to let you go. I will see you next week, and we'll be talking about, what are we talking about next week? Developing a research question. Awesome. Excellent. So we will be talking about that next week. All right. Bye-bye.
Night.
Bye.